So today I'm going to be covering the narrative that is found in the Bible. So we ask ourselves, the Bible, does it have an overarching theme? Does it have a story that it attempts to tell through its entirety? Most of us, we look at the Bible and we see a confusing set of stories. However, when we actually stop and just take a quick step back and look at the overarching themes that are found throughout the Bible, we start to see a pattern. We start to see that there is indeed a story. The story starts out like any other story. So you could think of your favorite book that you've read in your entire life. It could be anything. It could be even Lord of the Rings for all I care. By all means, pick something. What does it have? What are the key elements to a story? You have the setting, you have the initial conflict, you have the rising action within that, the resolution, and the epilogue. So then you have to ask yourself, how then does that follow with the biblical narrative? The story starts out in Genesis 1 and 2. We all know the creation account. I'm very certain that pretty much every Christian should know the creation account. It's the first thing that you read when you pick up your Bible and start from the beginning, other than whatever introduction that your particular version might have. Like copyright claims and such, but we won't go into that. So your setting is Genesis 1 and 2, the creation of the earth, every plant that lives on the earth, every animal that moves and breathes on the earth, and the pinnacle of the creation, humanity. Beyond that, there's also the creation of all the celestial bodies that are in the universe. Like, for example, the stars and the various planets. So, God created the heavens and the earth. And at the very start, everything was perfect. There was nothing, zilch, nada, that could ever be bad in this entire universe. It was very good, God said. So then what happened? Obviously, when you look at the world around us today, things are nowhere near perfect. Heavens, they're terrible. They're horrendous. People are slaughtering each other. People are going to town, having whatever fun that they might want to. Where's God in all this? Let's continue on with the story. The initial conflict. So we have our setting. We're in the garden. Adam and Eve are created, and they're living human beings. They're walking around, interacting with everything, and everything's perfect. But then, the antagonist is introduced. Satan, the devil. He comes disguised as a serpent. Now, what the serpent looked like, we don't know. Some people have envisioned Satan as looking like a serpent that had legs. Honestly, I don't know how a snake with legs is a fairly terrifying prospect, to say the least. But God had evidently cursed the serpent so that he would have to slither on the ground. So, potentially he had legs? Beats me. It's not my place to learn. But mankind is tempted by Satan. And so we have the first choice that mankind is forced to take in this narrative. We can either trust God and his plan, or we could go down a different road. We could trust in ourselves. We could make our own future. We could do what we want. Adam and Eve decided, you know what? Forget God. We're not going to listen to you. You don't know better than we do. We're going to eat this fruit. And they ate it. Immediately, the Bible says, their eyes were opened, and they saw that they were naked, and they were ashamed. They knew what they did was wrong. They knew that, whoa crap, what just happened? They disobeyed against God. his direct command not to eat of that tree, they disobeyed it, and now they're paying the consequences. So then we have the pronouncement. God comes into the garden, and he shouts out, Adam, where are you? This is a rhetorical question. This is God giving Adam and Eve a chance to come out and confess their sins. Now, to confess sins is to agree with God that, hey, I've sinned. Adam and Eve, however, do not do this. Adam tries to just play it off by going, oh yeah, I heard you walking in the garden and I hid myself because I was naked. Who told you you were naked? Remember, Adam and Eve were naked from their creation. They were naked and were not ashamed before the fall. After the fall, they were naked and very, very ashamed. So who told you you were naked? They come out, and Adam immediately pins the blame on Eve. It was the woman that you gave me. Oh, playing the blame game now, eh, Adam? What does Eve have to say to this? God turns to her and she said, the serpent that you created tempted me. So you're putting the blame on God now and the serpent. God because he created the serpent, and the serpent because he was the one who tempted. Okay, blame game it is. So God turns to the serpent and pronounces a curse on him. He's going to slither on his belly, and there's going to be enmity, hostility between him and the seed of the woman. And the seed of the woman will crush the head, a killing blow, and the snake will bite his heel. And it's something he'll recover from later on. Keep in mind this prophecy. This curse is a prophecy, the first one that's given. Keep in mind as we move forward. So then a curse is pronounced on Eve, that her pain in childbirth will be greatly increased, and her desire will be for her husband. And finally, the judgment on Adam, that the ground is cursed before him. He's going to have to work hard in order to make off a living. He's going to need to work hard in order to get the food that he needs to survive. So, they go out from the garden. They're expelled. God knows they've eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They know good and evil. They can define it. Let's prevent them from eating of the tree of life, so that they will not live, so that they won't live forever. This was an act of mercy on God's part. Whether we would want to see it as that or not, this is an act of mercy. So, that's the setting and the initial conflict. And we see in the initial conflict that sin has entered the world. Mankind is now infected with a stain, a disease that permutates everything. Death spread like wildfire. Things could die now. I mean, think of it. Before the fall, there was no death. There was nothing. No animals would die, no humans would die, no plants would die. Okay, in a sense, I guess plants could die because humans would eat them, but that's another story. So, death is now here in the world. And we go into the rising action, which covers almost the entirety of the Bible. Going from Genesis 4 to Revelation 18. There's this small, tiny portion on either end that's dedicated to either side of the book. The beginning and the end. The setting and initial conflict and the resolution and epilogue are set aside at the very end. Just this tiny little section, a few chapters long. Actually, now that I come to think of it, each one's 3 chapters long. Consistency. So from Genesis 4 to Revelation 18. Starting with Genesis 4, we have mankind's sin. After Adam and Eve sinned, now every offspring of theirs had the capability to sin. The next sin that entered the world was murder. Cain killed Abel out of the jealousy of his heart, because he came to God on his own terms, saying, what I've done will be enough for God. Abel came before God according to the way that God wanted, through an animal sacrifice. God accepted Abel's sacrifice but rejected Cain's. Cain was angry and jealous of his brother and wanted to kill him. Before he did, God gave Cain a warning. Sin is encroaching on your heart's door. Turn away. Cain didn't. He had a warning from God, and he had his conscience as well that was given to him at the fall. Nothing. Cain murdered his brother in cold blood. After that, God continued his work through the line of Seth. Mankind continued to grow and prosper vastly, covering the whole earth. But sin was rampant. Extremely rampant. It got so bad that God decided it would be better to wipe mankind off the face of the earth and start new. So he found one man, one family, that was still righteous. Noah. He told Noah one of the most outlandish things you could ever think of that time. Build a boat. I'm going to send a flood. Wait, what? God, you're sending a flood? No such a thing has ever even happened before. What's going on? I'm going to flood the entire world, and I'm going to kill everybody but you and your family. Oh, and animals that you'll keep on the ark as well. But, we'll talk about that later. Okay. So Noah went and he built the ark. It was ridiculous back then because there was no rain. Rain was not a thing. It was still in the time where a mist would come up from the earth and water the entirety of it. That's how the world got its water. That's how the plants got their water. There was no such thing as rain yet. So Noah builds an ark. And everybody's laughing at him because it's just like, hey Noah, what you doing, boy? Are you dead? Are you brain dead? Come on, there's no water for miles around. What are you doing building a boat out here in the middle of nowhere? Pfft, you're stupid. He keeps on building. People have every opportunity to recognize the danger that's coming. Noah's preaching that there's going to be destruction coming. No one listens. So the flood comes, kills all of life on earth. But Noah and his family are saved because of their faith and because they believed and obeyed God. Coming out of the ark, mankind is started anew. And we go out, and they're commanded to go and spread throughout the whole earth. But they don't. Mankind at this point is still able to speak one language. We're all unified in language. It's a nice prospect, and we'd like to think, oh yeah, if we all unified under one tongue, everything would be so much easier. Well, trust me, for these guys, it definitely was. The Tower of Babel was erected, and the city of Babel was made. People came together and decided, let's make a name for ourselves so that we won't be scattered. And let's make a tower that reaches up into heaven. God said, okay, you know what? Y'all are disobeying my command to scatter across the whole earth, so I'm going to make sure that you do. So God confounded them. He confused them. He created a myriad of languages. Every language that we know in the world today, God created right there. Spread them out. Send them off. Now, languages developed over the years. The roots for every language was made right there. God spread them out. He sent them off. Spread out. People groups who spoke the same language gathered together. And they all went off to their own little lands. So fast forward, out of the ashes of Babel came a man named Abram from the land of Ur. God told Abram that he was going to bless him, that he was going to make him a great nation. The nation of Israel. So you're going to have to, leave your home, because I'm going to bless you. The covenant that God established with Abram was unconditional in the fact that it didn't require anything on Abram's part in order for it to be fulfilled. God was the only person who needed to fulfill his end of the covenant. That made things a lot easier on old Abram, I can tell you that. Because he failed a lot. He didn't trust God in so many circumstances. In the end, though, his faith was rewarded. And Isaac, his son, was born. His second son, and heir. He had one son, thanks to his Egyptian housewife. Yeah, tell me how that goes for you. It doesn't go well for Israel later on. Isaac's born. God comes to Abraham, and tells him, I want you to sacrifice Isaac to me. Abraham, with this knowledge, goes to a mountain, and he takes his son with him. His servants ask him, where's the animal for the sacrifice? He said, God will provide. Both me and my son will return. Even Isaac asks this question, where's the lamb for the offering? Abraham said, God will provide. He firmly believed that God would not let his son die. Either Isaac would be sacrificed and raised from the dead, or God would provide another way. So Abraham subdues Isaac, binds him, and is about ready to sacrifice him when God calls out for Abraham to stop. His faith has been rewarded. Now that God knows Abraham won't even withhold his own son, God already knew that Abraham wouldn't withhold his son. God provided then a substitutionary lamb, a ram that had gotten caught in the thicket by its horns. So that was sacrificed in Isaac's stead. A provisionary sacrifice. And keep this in mind as we move through the story. So then the story continues, and Isaac gets married, has Jacob and Esau. Two siblings, twins, born, and man, there was rivalry from the get-go. Esau was hairy, a big man. He was hairy from head to toe, even from birth, covered in reddish hair. And he was a hunter. Jacob, on the other hand, was smooth. He was not a hunter. He was more of the farmer type. As the story goes, between these two brothers, Esau's out hunting one day, but he is unable to catch anything. Well, he comes to his brother Jacob and says, I haven't been able to catch anything. Would you be able to give me a bowl of soup? Jacob, being the ever so sly man that he is, decides to say, I'll give you a bowl of soup if you sell me your birthright. Esau said, done. I have to say, that's probably the worst trade deal in the history of trade deals ever. Selling your birthright meant that you were giving up everything that you would have inherited from your father. In this case, Esau gave up the promise of having a nation be born through him. And so Jacob inherited the birthright because he bought it thanks to a bowl of soup and a hungry belly. It's amazing what hunger will do to you, kids. So, pack a lunch. Jacob inherits the blessing. And he goes out, marries two wives, because you know what? His father-in-law is one sly dude, just like him. You should have been careful there, Jacob, but you weren't. Well done. Jacob has 12 kids, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, 12 boys, anyways. Who knows how many daughters he had. And these 12 sons went on to give birth to the nation of Israel. And thus concludes the first out of 3 sections in the Bible, from the beginning to Israel. Opening up, we see the next section, from Israel to Jesus. Opening up this little sub-story, we see in the setting that the Israelites are in Egypt and they're in slavery. They're in bondage. God decides, you know what? You shouldn't be in bondage, and your cries have been heard to me. I'm going to get you out of here. So he raises up Moses to deliver his people out from Egyptian bondage. So the 12 plagues sweep across the land with Moses at the helm. By God's power, the Israelites are led out, despite Egypt's deception and attempt to chase them down and recapture them. Israel's still led out across the Red Sea to safety. And so, the Jews and the nation of Israel are saved. And the temple and sacrifices have begun with the tabernacle. The people of Israel had their own way to be made right before God. They were given the law, most commonly attributed with the 10 Commandments, which we all know by the thou shalts. Thou shalt have no other God before me. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not lust. Thou shalt not covet. We all know them. Israel was bound to fail because they were not given a new nature. They still had their old sin nature in them. And as a result, God knew, okay, you guys are going to fail miserably. But I'm going to give you a way that you can come back to me. Animal sacrifice at the temple was instituted. This was a provisionary sacrifice for Israel. Moving on through the story, we see the Jews did fail a lot. In fact, they failed so much that even when they were out to go to Israel, the Jews on the way from Egypt to Israel failed so much that God said, this generation isn't even going to make it into the promised land. The next generation is going to inherit it. One whole generation, gone, wiped off the maps. You know what? New generation, you get the promised land. Moses didn't even get to go into it. He got to see the promised land, but he didn't even get to go in it. So Israel enters into the promised land of Canaan. And they're commanded, wipe out all of them. Wipe out all of the residents. They're only going to cause you to stumble. They failed to do that, and you know what the residents did? They caused the Jews to stumble. God gives you a warning. You better listen. And they didn't. So Israel is in a constant cycle. A cycle of sin. God, we need help. God raises up someone to deliver Israel. And they go back to sinning. God, we need help. Raises up someone to deliver them. Back to sinning. This is known as the period of the Judges and can be read in the record of the Judges. And so Israel kept on sinning. Kept on getting delivered. Kept on sinning. Kept on getting delivered. Kept on sinning. When are you guys going to learn? Never, because they still have an old sin nature that infects them. So God gives Israel a king. And Saul is made the first king of Israel. You think everything's going to be good and dandy now, right? Israel has a king, a firm, solid ruler that they can all look to and point to and go, yeah, man, he's the king. He makes the rules. The king of Israel was under the authority of the king, the ultimate king, the King of Kings, God. The first king was Saul, and he did not end up being a good king. He ended up being a very bad king. Not the worst that Israel has ever received, but not the one that they needed. They went based off of his looks, based off of his attitude. They didn't go based off of his heart. The Philistines come in and pose a threat. Israel sends their army against them. But the Philistines say, you know what? Let's strike a deal. We're going to send out our toughest, strongest warrior against you. You send out your toughest, strongest warrior against him. We win, you become our slaves. You win, we become your slaves. What do you say? Saul agrees. And then the strongest Philistine warrior comes out. Goliath, a giant. If you've ever heard of the ministry called Goliath's Spear, then you can imagine how tall he is. Goliath's spear itself is about 10 feet tall. That's counting the shaft, the counterbalance, and the head. Goliath would have been probably a little shorter than that, so close to around the 9 feet zone. That's one tall dude. And he's muscular. He's strong. Israel's afraid of him, and they don't even send anyone out. For several days, Goliath comes out, waiting for a challenger, and mocks Israel. Then comes David. Oh, little shepherd boy David. He was sent out to the Israelite camp from his father Jesse to give supplies to his brothers. When David hears Goliath mocking Israel and their God, he's infuriated. Why hasn't anybody gone up against him? He's mocking our God. Is nobody going to stand up to him? Everybody's afraid. And so David goes off to Saul and he basically says, all right, you know what? None of you are going to do this. I'm going to fight Goliath. Saul practically laughs at that. But David ends up fighting Goliath. And to cut long story short, slinging a stone, make a hole in your head. Goliath falls, and his head is chopped off, and the Philistines are killed. David eventually becomes the king of Israel. Under his rule, Israel was prosperous. In fact, one of the books that we really should read more and learn a lot more from, the Psalms, much of the Psalms was actually written by David himself, a psalmist, a songwriter. But David wasn't without his faults. He eventually was led into adultery, and his household was torn apart as a result. He was a man after God's own heart, and he still sinned, showing that, hey, the infection of sin is still so strong within humanity. Not even the most godly man in the universe at that time was resistant to it. Then, David's son Solomon, born through his adultery with Bathsheba, is made king. God comes to Solomon and says, I'm going to give you whatever you ask, one thing that you ask for. Solomon doesn't ask for riches. He doesn't ask for anything material. He asks for wisdom. And God gave him wisdom. He became the wisest man in the entirety of the world. And in fact, he wrote most of what is called the Proverbs. Much of the wisdom of King Solomon is recorded there, with some wisdom from other people as well thrown in. Solomon, the glory of Solomon's day was almost unparalleled. He erected the temple to God that his father David had planned. The Queen of Sheba came because she had heard of the glory of Israel because they were blessed by God. She came saying, you guys are blessed by God. But as with all good things, they must come to an end. Solomon was corrupted, just like everyone else. And he married many, 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 many wives and had many more concubines. He also wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. He was in a position of great power where he could explore everything under the sun that could be offered to him. And he wrote this wisdom, this very depressing wisdom literature, saying that nothing under the sun gives any satisfaction whatsoever. And that's still true today. There's this glimmer of hope in that book, though, that says there must be something above the sun that gives us hope, that gives us joy. And that's God. Continuing on, we see that the next rulers of Israel caused the kingdom to split. The northern tribes and the southern tribes. 10 tribes go to the north. 2 tribes remain in the south. Israel and Judah. So, Israel falls into deep sin. Judah has some good kings, occasionally. But both of them have many horrendous kings. And the nation of Israel and Judah fall into deep, deep sin. God sends the prophets to condemn the nation of Israel and warn them of coming destruction that will be inadvertible. Israel refuses to listen, and in many cases the prophets are killed. They didn't want to hear the story. So, Babylon comes. Babylon. Does that name sound somewhat familiar? Think Babel. Babylon comes and takes the south. And Assyria comes and takes the north. Israel is taken into captivity. It's only later that a remnant is released to come back and rebuild Israel and the temple. But after this comes a dark period where we don't have anything, the intertestamental period, from Malachi to Matthew. And thus ends the second section of the Bible. And now, from Jesus to eternity, the third section. It opens up with Jesus' birth. Jesus comes to earth. He is the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, and he is perfect. He's called the great high priest in the book of Hebrews, tempted in every which way, but did not sin. He is able to perfectly empathize with our struggles. Jesus comes and he's proclaimed by John the Baptist. Behold the Lamb of God who comes to take away the sins of the world. Jesus proves his kingship by the fact that he was born through the line of David. We can see it in the genealogies of both Matthew and Luke from both of his parents, Mary and David, Mary and Joseph. Wow, where did that come from? They were both descendants from the line of David. Joseph provides a unique problem in that his line is cursed. There are a couple ways around this, but it is not important to the story. Jesus proves his messiahship by doing miracles that only the Messiah can do. Healing a lame man, healing leprosy, and healing a man that was born blind. Israel rejected him still. Jesus then proves his deity. One of the main ways that he did was he died on the cross. And 3 days later, he rose from the grave. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I shall raise it up again, he said. The Jewish leaders laughed at him, saying, "It took us hundreds of years to build this temple," referring to the temple of God that they were standing in. "And you say you will destroy it and raise it up in 3 days? Preposterous." Now, it's preposterous if you understand what Jesus was talking about. The very next few verses, the author says, but Jesus was talking about his body. Jesus died and he rose again, conquering sin and death. He became the perfect substitutionary sacrifice, the last provisionary sacrifice that we would ever need in our lives. So then Jesus ascends into heaven, giving a proclamation to the apostles and to his disciples. Go and make disciples of all nations. To this day, we're still in what's called the church age according to dispensationalists. We have not yet reached the final stage, the tribulation. The final part of the biblical story starts with the rapture of the church. All of the church age saints are taken up, gone, poof. Where did everybody go? Then the tribulation comes for 7 years. Hardships. The world becomes different, to say the least. In the last half of the tribulation, it becomes even worse. A pact is signed by the Antichrist with Israel. Christians are persecuted. Tribulation saints killed. And at the very end, Jesus comes. This is a semi-climactic point. Not quite a full climax, but it's almost there. So then, we reach the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Christ has returned to earth, and he sweeps away Satan's forces and imprisons Satan for 1,000 years and reigns for 1,000 years. At that time, many more people are born in the kingdom, and some of them believe and follow Christ. Some of them still do not want any part of the kingdom of God. They don't want any part of Jesus. They want their flesh. And so, after the 1,000 years, Satan is loosed. This is the last part of the story. With Satan loosed, we're at the last part. He gathers his forces from the four corners of the world and attempts to overthrow God. God sweeps them away and sends them up to hell. At this point, the story has reached its conclusion. Satan is defeated. Sin and death gone for all eternity. The heavens and the earth are destroyed, and a new heaven and a new earth are created. For all those who are saved, the remnant of Israel, the Gentiles who believed, and the church saints. And for the rest of eternity, there is peace, worshiping Jesus and God for the rest of eternity. A perfect world, free from the corruption and the sin that we all face. The overarching story of the Bible is that of the redemption of mankind, told through so many different literary styles, from narrative to poems to prose discourse. And throughout the whole story, we see mankind faced with choices. With Adam and Eve, they had the choice of a split in the road. They could either trust God or they could trust themselves. With Israel, they could either follow God or they could follow their own flesh. With us, today, we can either trust Christ or trust ourselves. In the end, the whole story of the Bible is that of the redemption of mankind. What God has done, what God has given to us, the hope that God has for us. That's the story of the Bible. Finally!